Right, that's it. The chat's like, finally, there we go. Right, we're live, everyone. You can unmute yourself, Discord, Mango Press crew. Welcome to the show. Hold on, Tom. Welcome to the show, everyone. Episode 53. It's Friday night. We are... Hold on, I'm getting a bit of feedback through one of you guys. I can hear myself, so... Just you, Art, say I can hear myself coming through your speaker. There we go. Anyway, I apologise for that. Welcome to the show, episode 53. We're live on YouTube. With us this week, we've got Artsy Painting. Say hello, Artsy.
I'm muted.
You're muted now. Very muted. I can hear you. Unmute yourself. So just unmute it. Artsy, unmute yourself. Okay, Tom, you say hello. Vito, you say... Oh, he's here now. Artsy, you can say hello at the end, right? Tom, you say hello first.
Yeah, I apologise. I think the reason we're a bit late is... Well, actually, I blame Vito because me and Vito were talking in a fucking Twitter space till like 1 a.m. Vito actually forgot we had a podcast this morning. However, we recruited some people to come and watch us this morning, I think, because we had a couple of
show, boys. It's not excuse. I'm only joking.
Hey! Less of that.
I'm only joking, of course. Hello, Vito.
Hello.
Yeah. How are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't go. I didn't do what Tom did. I didn't go to sleep.
Oh wow!
Wow.
Hardcore.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how far I can,
stay
keep
up.
my eye. Yeah.
Wow. You've been.
Keep my eyes.
Don't fall asleep during the show.
Oh no. Definitely. Why would I want to do that?
Yeah, hopefully you won't. Right, anyway, Artsy, have you sorted your mic out? Can you hear us now? You see there? I can see you, I just can't hear you.
Yep, I can hear you.
There you go, say hello.
Sorry about that. My volume went out for literally like right after you said my name.
Don't worry. Say hello, what are you painting for us today?
Can't hear me? Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, I think I'm a little delayed, but I'm painting a phoenix. Yeah, I'm painting a phoenix. I don't really know the direction I'm gonna go with it yet, but yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Nice. Does that phoenix represent the USSR by any chance?
Yes, it does, and it also kind of represents what I want to see from the Western left. I've just been kind of disappointed with how people are so willing to ally with NATO, and so I want to see something better,
I mean, what a strange position to take up as a so-called socialist / leftist / progressive / human, just human being pro-NATO. Weird. What a weird argument that in 2022 Western leftists are having to argue with other so-called Western leftists on whether supporting NATO is a legitimate position to take. our socialist grandparents had this argument already. What's going on? Ridiculous.
The takes I've seen the past 2 days have been some of the most horrific takes I've ever seen in my life.
Do you have any examples?
I've got plenty of examples. I've got more examples. I've got thousands of examples. Go on Twitter right now. Go on to left-wing Twitter and just scroll down for 5 minutes, and you'll see 50 bad examples instantly.
That's true.
I mean, there's all these we don't have to pick a side takes from like Americans. I'm like, if you're American, if you're British, if you're fucking French, if you're Spanish, you do have to pick a side. or shut the fuck up. They are your two options, I'm afraid. It's like saying, like, we've got Iraq. You got 2003 Iraq. You've got, like, the USA moving in and Britain moving in together to pincer maneuver the government of Iraq into a non-existence. And, like, I bet you would have had some of these fucking quote-unquote leftists saying, it's an inter-imperialist war. Saddam Hussein tried to conquer Kuwait. We don't have to pick a side. Sorry, I know I'm doing the American voice a lot, but this is how I read these statements in my mind. These are literally...
It goes without saying that there was Trotskyists around at the time of the... Some of us here are old enough to remember that period of history, right?
No. What I'm saying is, like, if you had fucking left-wing Twitter at that point in time, all of these people that are saying the same shit about, like, the situation today would be saying exactly the same shit about Iraq.
Well, they were, just not on Twitter. They literally were, but just not on Twitter.
I know.
So yeah, what's going on? I mean, we're seeing people who are... We're seeing people who have historically... I don't want to say take the side, because I don't think it's about taking a side in this conflict, is it? Or any conflict. But what it is about is making sure you represent the correct voice on the ground, right? I think that's what the main point. I don't think it's about picking a side. I think the Western left is too focused on black and white, and if somebody's not, like, the most well-versed Marxist, you've got to cancel them instantly and all this. I think that's not the way to deal with these situations, right? But I think nuance isn't being applied here, and also the straight up just the use of imperialist language without realizing, I think, is a big problem. And also the use of Western media in this as well. The reliance, people revert, they have a default, they talked the game for months about being anti-imperialist, but now have reverted to the sharing of news which 10 minutes later comes out to be debunked, right? Like, for example, the conflict that we've seen spare up in Ukraine, right? Before we get into the ins and outs of it, we saw a video being shared online the other day. It's one of many examples, right? Of apparently a military jet, firing a missile, flying at such a stupid low angle that, like, it's unexplainable in the first place. But it flies at such a low angle and what apparently looks like shoots at what you can't tell because it's off camera, but it looks like it's shooting at something on the ground, right? So that video was being shared. Hold on, Tom. That video was being shared within minutes by people claiming it was with certainty that it's something, only for it to not be, right, and it to be the opposite. It's the opposite of what's going on. But there's no repercussion of that in the West. Another example of this today happened, Tom, before I come to you. A video footage of what apparently was one side running over the other, right? And then 2 minutes later it comes out that it's not. But before that, Western media outlets have already published it in the mainstream to the masses as fact, right? With this isn't journalism. It's not how journalism is supposed to operate, especially in such a tense setup like this. I mean, if you're going to, you should be able to identify what is on the battlefield if you're going to report on it, right? It should come as a standard, regardless of what side you're taking. It should come regardless. As an absolutely beautiful old Soviet T-34 just drove past on the screen, and I was distracted by it. But anyway, Tom, what were you going to say?
First of all, with that video of the fighter jet, like, I've never ever been in a plane before in my life, but I think I could have done a better job of flying that MiG-32 than that dude was MiG-29 than that dude was doing. Like, absolutely atrocious show of fucking maneuvers.
What was he even doing?
Exactly, insanity. Oh, that's the Ghost of Kiev. He was just doing a 5D chess play.
Oh, he was trying to look bad to scare the Russian pilots, right? The Ghost of Kiev.
they'd all come down, and then he'd shoot 7 of them out of the sky.
But that's another one, right? Explain this Ghost of Kiev. Go on.
So there's this piece of morale boost propaganda going around. That's all I can call it at the moment, which is claiming that there's a single Ukrainian pilot who has scored 7 fighter jet kills in this 2-day war, right? Which is unheard of. Like, not even some of the best fighter aces in world history have had a ratio that good. Not even like the best German fighter aces fighting in the Soviet Union. I don't think any of them managed to kill 7 planes in one day. And this is like modern fighter jets with advanced avionics, radars, what's the thing? Chaff to get rid of lock-on missiles, all these kind of things. It's practically impossible to get an air-to-air kill these days with how advanced fighter jets are. And we're to believe that some Ukrainian Nazi is managing to shoot down like far more advanced Russian planes, and not just 1 or 2 of them, but 7 of them in one day, and we've got no footage of this. So this is extreme.
No footage exists versus Syrian veterans.
Yeah, so this is very clearly, as I say, it's morale boost propaganda. It's to make the Ukrainian side feel good and have something to, I don't know, fight for.
Yeah, but it gets funnier than that, though, right? Because where does do you know where the story comes from, right?
Yeah. So,
carry on.
so we see this video appear yesterday, supposedly claiming to be camera phone footage of the Ghost of Kiev doing one of his legendary shoot downs, and like. It's weird because like the camera footage starts off really shaky. It seems like it's like a young girl holding the phone, and then she pans up to the sky, and you see this like perfect like video shot of this MiG fly overhead and perform this amazing air-to-air kill. And I was like, whoa, okay, maybe there is some truth to this. But then it turns out
explosions and everything, right?
Yeah. You see the missile, you see the trace, you see the plane get hit. Things that you never see in modern combat. Like you see some aerial footage from like the last good dogfight footage we actually have all around the world is during one of Israel's last wars of them shooting down a Syrian jet. When I say good footage, I mean good quality footage where you can actually see something.
Also, dogfighting footage is rare, right? Good as in you can see the planes actually fighting, right?
It's practically unheard of. You don't get this. So I first glimpse, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like what an incredibly lucky person that is to catch that on camera. And then instantly it was revealed that this was actually what was the game?
DCS World.
DCS World, a Russian like PC. War Thunder type of game, like
PC flight simulator.
Yeah. So absolutely ridiculous, assertion. And then it turns out that the entire idea of the Ghost of Kiev was invented by a different video game streamer who plays Arma 2, is it?
Yeah. This one's even better. This one's even funnier.
Yeah. So like he created various homages to this guy called the Ghost of Kiev.
He like made a character up, right? Wasn't it his like YouTube series was like I'm pretty sure it was his fantasy DCS series was called like the Ghost of Kiev.
Something like that. And then like somebody called him out and said, are you just inventing this guy or does he actually exist? And he's like, well, no one knows if he actually exists, but if he doesn't, he's a great way to boost morale for the Ukrainian people. And if he does exist, the best one, if he does exist, I'm going to make merch about him.
Oh yeah, this is the guy who runs the original source channel of the footage. Right?
Yeah. So it's basically some guy shilling t-shirts. Essentially, has created this Ukrainian hero.
He's not shilling t-shirts yet. He's smelt the opportunity to shill. Smelt the opportunity. Smart businessman, right? That's what he's doing. Yeah. It gets better though, Tom, because you mentioned the game Arma there, right? That's also been seen, and that was by some sort of Vietnamese fascist. I clicked on their profile and they had the South Vietnam flag. So it's like, okay, yeah, you're crazy to begin with. But he'd posted a video of Arma 2 or Arma 3. I think it was Arma I couldn't tell because it had mods. It's obviously got mods attached to it. But anyway, the footage was of is it MRAP, the anti-air minigun, Tom? Is it MRAP? I forget off the top of my head. MRAP system,
Email.
right?
The one that's mounted on boats and stuff.
Yeah, for shooting down planes, right? That one.
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
When America like post footage of them using it, don't they? In like Iraq, they'd like Americans go wild for it because the sound the system makes. Anyway, I forget his name. It was footage of that in armor, basically shooting it, which was quote unquote a Russian jet. Do you know what the Russian jet was, Tom? It was an A-10 Warthog. People are so dumb.
That's the thing, though. You can just stick anything on the internet these days, and it gets kind of uncritically absorbed without context. Like that video of the fighter jet, the actual video of the fighter jet coming in low and striking targets on the ground. And you see a Ukrainian girl who's filming it, like runs away crying. Like this was instantly shared as like a Russian air-to-ground attack against Ukrainian civilians, right? Even the Daily Mirror, I believe, in the UK picked it up as evidence of a British war crime. Sorry, there's plenty of evidence of them of a Russian war crime against Ukraine, right? And then within like 20 minutes of the video coming out, it had already been debunked because Russia doesn't use the MiG-29 platform in an air-to-ground capacity. It mostly uses the MiG-29 for training missions now and export.
It's a 30-year-old jet, right?
Yeah. Most of the
MiG-29. Anybody who knows the Russian military, MiG has been MiG, the company, got all the aviation companies got absorbed by Sukhoi, didn't they? Aeroflot, all of those MiG. So the Sukhoi is the premium of jets, right? That's why they don't make MiGs anymore. Because MiG is Sukhoi now. Why would Russia use a 30-year-old jet, right?
Yeah. So anyway, it came out that this was literally a Ukrainian plane, right? I mean, me and Harrison were arguing with this one particular fucking idiot, who was like, "Here's some footage of your Russian war crimes. This is the guy. This is what you're supporting."
The footage of what we were speaking about earlier, right? The jet.
Yeah. And so instantly, me and Harrison replied, "Well, Russia doesn't use MiG-29s. This is actually a Ukrainian plane." And he instantly, as soon as he said that, he was like, "Oh, well, if it was a Ukrainian plane, then they must have been attacking Russian armor. So it's Russian armor's fault for hiding behind Ukrainian houses. So it's still a Russian war crime." I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? These people are absolutely insane. It's crazy."
Yeah.
Just you can't. But that's what I'm saying. The only source that I've seen that's genuinely been completely transparent and really accurate this whole time is ASB Military. They've been very cognizant to explain their sources. They've been following up on all these claims, all the propaganda. They've been posting on the ground footage. That they've been genuinely the only source I've been able to follow that has been able to that competently posts maybe not an unbiased view but a less biased view of what's going on than anywhere else, whereas literal mainstream media outlets like, as I say, the Daily Mirror are picking up complete fabricant propaganda from Twitter and just posting it and saying, "Yep, this is what's happening."
Yeah. Literally not even doing basic like journalist work to just verify that. I mean, if you're, I mean, in the days of old, if you were a conflict journalist, that would be your specialism, right? And you would at least have like a book of Russian armor, right? That identified. So you can identify the battlefield, right? You would go in with an intel book, just like a football commentator knows the players of the opposition team, right? And well, both teams, and can just name them by seeing where they are on the pitch, or by the number on their shirt, or by the colour of it. Do you get what I'm saying? That's how journalism is supposed to be carried out. It doesn't matter whether you're pro or against these situations, they shouldn't be jumping the gun, because they're just adding to the conflict, aren't they? It's almost like they're festering at the mouth for an escalation. I think that's the position Westerners take on this situation that's going down at the minute. They want to see more. They're talking about all this and that's going on. I don't see any of that going on. Do you want this to be a drawn out war? Do you? Is that what Westerners want?
I think they want they want to be justified in thinking that Russia is this big evil force. So when you actually tell them the truth of the situation, that pretty much only military targets have been struck, with a specific emphasis on neo-Nazi militia bases, pretty much all of the on-the-ground fighting has been the Russian army and the DPR, LPR militias versus actual fascist militias, because a lot of the Ukrainian army has just laid down their arms. When you start telling them facts like this, it doesn't gel with their worldview that
what
Russia
we've seen,
bad.
right? What we've seen. I mean, there's most certainly. I mean, the first casualty of war is the truth, right? That old saying. So there's definitely stuff going on that nobody's seeing. So nobody can sit here and confidently report on it. But you can't. What I'm trying to say is, you can't report on things that aren't happening. You should just stick to the things that are. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying, really. Basically, like, as of what we know, the clearest evidence, at least from the Russian side, which has been really fairly transparent about this so far, is that they are specifically attacking military targets. They're telling us which military targets they're hitting and then occupying. They're not going in and fucking machine gunning civilians or anything like that. And, like, I think the Western media needs us to believe that they are doing all these bad things because they've been hyping this Russian invasion. It's going to be the bloodiest war since World War II. It's going to be the most brutal war Europe's ever seen, all this kind of stuff. And we haven't really seen that. The death toll is fairly low, considering it's a conflict of such scale, right? In terms of when I say scale, I mean the fact that they're using multiple launch rocket systems, they're using fighter jets, they're using missile strikes. If America had done a war of this caliber, there'd be like 10 times the deaths instantly. But even the Ukrainian side is only reporting 40 total military casualties, which I'm sure is a downplaying, and they're reporting 10 civilian casualties, right? Now, I've personally seen 2 videos of Ukrainian army armor, so Ukrainian tanks and Ukrainian, I think it was a Strela 10, driving over civilian cars in Ukraine as people are in them. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to at least presume that at least 2 of them supposed 10 civilian deaths are caused by the Ukrainian side. Probably more, because we've seen video footage of their fighter jets attacking people on the ground, whether accidentally or on purpose. We've seen the fact that, like, their rash desire to give AK-47s out to civilians has led to, like, massacres of innocent civilians by other Ukrainian civilians who were mistaken for Russian operatives or something. Like, this conflict, as you say, the first casualty of war is the truth, and history is written by the victor, and all those kind of cliche sayings. But from what I've been able to see from the sources I've corroborated, I haven't seen any evidence by the Western side or by the Ukrainian side of a single Russian atrocity happening. I've seen multiple pieces of evidence of Ukraine either accidentally or purposefully killing their own civilians, and all the news I've heard from the Russian side and from independent sources, neutral sources on the ground, is that basically Russia is only targeting military infrastructure, right? So I've never seen a war this light-handed from a great power before, insofar as so keen to avoid civilian casualties.
Yesterday. Day one of invasion, quote unquote, and nothing's happening at night. Right? There was about 10 hours yesterday of just complete silence. Like, it's very strange. What do we think's caused it then? Like, what do we, after looking at what, I mean, right, 2014 is the, well, maybe not. In fact, 1991 is the main cause of this, right? It's it's the dissolution of the USSR, and it's the West's capitalist plan for Eastern Bloc, which was to, I guess, I guess the plan, they used fascists to dismantle the socialist governments of those countries, right? So they kind of got independence, quote unquote, from the USSR with a fascist base, right? So that's not a good start to begin with. Just in terms of building an efficient state, right? Fascists are no good at that shit. They're no good at that shit.
It's worth pointing out as well that the reason that fascists are so widely used by America in this like dissolution, de-Sovietization of the former USSR is not because like, and I'm not defending the USA here, but it's not that like they were like, ha ha ha, yeah, Nazis, let's use Nazis. But it's because like literally the only people who were pro dissolving the USSR were the Nazis.
Yeah. And the only people
they only had one ally.
Not just that, but the only people prepared to like go knock on some like union boss's door and fucking murder his like kids in front of him as a threat, right?
Yeah.
But do you get what I'm saying? You've got to use fascists because nobody else is that bloodthirsty. So anyway, those former...
You can use liberals later on, but like the liberals are just there to come in and manage the state that you've created with the fascists, essentially, or not even created, but like seized with fascists.
Pardon me.
Because you don't... I mean, no one wants actual open fascists in charge because, you know, we see what happens when Mussolini and Hitler are allowed to run rampant around Europe. So even America's like, right, I know I love war, I know I love weapons exports, but in order to keep the, you know, the quote unquote like the free democratic West free from more war, we need to basically use the Nazi saboteurs to dismantle the Soviet state, and then in the rubble and the ashes we can just implant some shit liberal to come and accept some IMF loans and sell off all of the infrastructure, and the Nazis can still run wild, but we just won't put them in a position of legislature.
So anyway, back to the problem at hand, right? So the problems for the area are just it's a European problem, right? This isn't just a Ukraine problem or a former Soviet country problem or a Russian plus Ukraine problem. This is a problem for all of Europe, right? This is the history of World War II, World War One, the destruction of imperialist powers in Europe. This is all to do with that history and it just being not consolidated in a natural way, the way that the masses of Europe wanted to settle it, the socialist way, if you will, right? Because it's everything. We've had shows with Escher, right, and some of the people who work with her historically on. This is why we do a show with historically, to tie those historic events into current events, right? Things like Project Gladio and the Stay Behind, and you know the fact that NATO are founded by ex-Nazis, the fact that West Germany was like a free-for-all for anybody who could make it there to get a job in government again. You know, all of this is the reason why this has gone on in the area.
If I may,
hold on. For the forced sort of aligning with the West of these countries and the use of fascism, it's just left these places like economic holes, so to speak, and it's just people are the real victim of this, right? Anyway, what were you going to say?
I think you've pretty much covered the historical basis of it there, but I've got a fantastic thread here from Shangyu talking about essentially the situation as it is on the ground. It's 8 tweets long, so I'll just read this out because it's, in my opinion, a really thorough analysis of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, just because Russia is not a socialist country does not change the progressive nature of its intervention in Ukraine. The conflict did not begin this month, but 8 years ago when the US-backed coup put neo-Nazi compradors into power. Over the last 8 years, Ukraine was systematically sold off to Western capitalists, destroying Ukraine's economy and bringing its living standard down to the lowest it's been since World War II. This suffering triggered a civil war in Ukraine, a country that's always been very diverse. The narrow Ukrainian chauvinism imposed by the neo-Nazi Banderites in Kiev was rejected by large segments of the population who didn't share their fascist vision for Ukraine. It wasn't just the Russian Ukrainians who rejected this, but also the Jews, the Romani, and the other minority nations within the state. The extreme anti-Sovietism of the neo-Nazi regime was rejected by large parts of the population who, ranging from communists to those who were broadly anti-imperialist, and people who generally support harmonious relations between the various national groups within Ukraine. These forces upheld themselves in Crimea, Donetsk, and Lugansk against Banderite fascism, and it was on behalf of these forces that Russia intervened. Putin doesn't have to be the second coming of Comrade Stalin for this to be a progressive intervention. For the last 8 years, Russia took a hands-off approach in an attempt to appease Western imperialists and prevent this from turning into a war. But this appeasement further emboldened the compradors in Kiev to keep pushing towards Russia. This aggression towards Russia.
I want to correct something there because they didn't take a hands-off. They didn't take a hands-off.
I think he means I think he means the Minsk Accords rather than a direct.
I would call. But what I'm saying is, I would call the Minsk Accords a direct approach. They were like the Minsk Accords is the diplomatic approach. You're seeing people now being like, diplomacy must be. We've had 8 years of it, and one side has constantly refused to sit back down at the table, or they sit down and then 2 minutes later go and flick a shell. It's like Britain and Ireland again, right? Carry on.
Yeah. The last tweet is this aggression towards Russia was supported by the USA, the EU, and NATO imperialists. Putin's decision was objectively the right call. Enough is enough. Russia's intervention is objectively on the side of the anti-fascists in Ukraine. Now, that simple explanation, I mean, obviously, I think when he says the part that you disagreed with, the diplomatic part, I think that is just a difference in terminology more than a difference in opinion. But what I'm saying is that thread there that I've just read is objectively the correct stance that any communist should take, right? Any Western communist. I feel like Russian communists, Ukrainian communists can have different views of the issue because it directly impacts them. They have a better view of the situation on the ground. They may have different opinions, right? Yeah. Now, did you see the way I said communists and not anarchists there? Because we've seen already that there are multiple anarchist militias siding with the Azov battalion and the OUN in Ukraine. So I don't trust anarchists as far as I can fucking throw them, because they are literally keen to side with Nazis when it comes to it. So, I mean, it's hard to, like, I know we call a lot of things Nazism, you know, not us personally, but, you know, you see communists saying the USA is a Nazi state and all this. And yeah, in some respects, it's definitely a fascist state. But when you talk about, like, Banderites in Ukraine,
brown shirts.
They are actual brown shirts. They are legitimate bandits. Neo-Nazis, bandits, neo-Nazis, whatever the terminology you want to use is. This makes the most hardcore American, you know, white nationalist lunatic look like nothing in comparison, really, when you look at the shit that they do.
When I first came across the term Banderite, I literally thought it was to do with the word bandit. I thought they were like trying to look hard. Do you know what I mean? Like the SS did with their skull, all their fucking skulls they used to put on stuff to try and look edgy. But exactly, I mean, yeah. Anyway, back on topic. I think the thread is right, but I think we're missing out quite a lot in terms of.
Yeah, it's a very brief overview of the situation, obviously, because I mean, you know, that was already 8 tweets long, and I guess his audience, not all of it, but a good portion of his audience is what you'd call like new communists and stuff like that, who, you know, they're seeing it from like a progressive anti-war stance. You know, all war is bad, all imperialism is bad. But Shang Yu is one of the most one of the most well-read communists I'm personally aware of. Like I trust his analysis in most situations, and the fact that it aligns with our own analysis leads me to believe we are vindicated. Because there has been so many. The reason I say this is because there's been so many bad takes that I keep thinking to myself, are we wrong about something? because so many people are completely on the opposite side. So many people that would call themselves communists are taking the complete opposite side. Are we reading into this wrong?
No, I think it's more that I understand where that comes from, and I think that people shouldn't, when you see that happening, you shouldn't instantly think that, like, not that, I mean, you're right to think that, but I think you shouldn't instantly like dismiss them as like a traitor or something. But what you should do is just realise that they probably don't really know the full, like they've probably, like, the problem with, I mean, it's like a bit of a self-crit, right? But the problem with being somebody who researches into this sort of stuff, you pull out like documents and you're like, but what about this document that only 10 people have seen, right? Because it's just some administrative document that's not been published. So it's almost a case of like, if you can sort of allow people who you know are not like an open fascist, right? You can kind of let them, give them a bit of benefit of the doubt. I get, but I don't. Like, we shouldn't be falling out over this. Do you know what I mean? We have a.
No, absolutely.
We've got to take. If somebody's sharing disinformation unknowingly or coming to a conclusion unknowingly, it's our job to. You're as bad as them if you don't take them under your wing, right? According to Mao's definition of liberalism, even. So it's got to be like that. So yeah.
Well, what I mean though is, like, it's not normally, you know, you see liberals that call themselves leftists, you know, anarchists, these kind of people generally taking one position.
You can almost tell straight away to just who's worth having a discussion
engaging with,
exactly, and who's just literally like not worth it. And also at the same time, remember that, like, we are passengers in all of this. We have absolutely no means of changing this situation and what's played out, right? Just because how the world is right now. So I think people have got to like not be so hostile when dealing with friends, right?
Contradictions.
No, dealing with stuff that you're seeing from friends. If you know the guy is an open supporter of fascism, then don't even bother, right? You're wasting your time with that person. Yeah, that's the way it is. Anyway, to build on what you just said, because that's what's going on now. There's more, like I said at the beginning, 1991 is the start of it, right? The dissolution of the USSR, the dissolving of it. But 2014 is like the defining moment in this specific conflict, because at that time, in the post 2008 world, right, there was like a period of world history called like the Arab Spring. This is kind of like the Arab Spring in Europe in a way, because it timed with all those other regime changes that were going on, and they were all pro.
Surprised they didn't call it the Slavic Spring.
They're probably you can probably find. Oh well, they picked Euromaidan in the end, didn't they? Because Germany had like, if Germany had have not said you could join the EU, it probably would have been called that. Germany kind of played the Maidan supporters by flaunting the EU in their face, only to shut the door straight away. But anyway, I digress. So during 2014, there was, as Shang Yu's thread touches upon, if you just look at election maps, you can find this on Wikipedia, right? So if you just go onto Wikipedia and start looking at their Ukrainian election articles, they will have the results and the graphs up there. Let me just get one up. Here we go, up on screen now. There's one. So this is for one of the right. I just want to stop. Nova in the chat there says regular Ukrainians are getting screwed over. Exactly, but that's been going on for 8 years it's been going on since 1991, but it's been going on at least for the last 8 years. But that's the main point in all this, right? Regular Ukrainians are getting screwed over. But anyway, here we go. This on the screen now is the election map for one of the Maidan parties, right? And as you can see there, the Donbass. This is 2019, so this is post Maidan. The map's not changed. You can pick any map of these parties and you'll get the same result. But as you can see, that the East is like not having it whatsoever, right? They're not interested in the right wing whatsoever. And even over in the West, there's only get minority support. These parties have to join coalitions with each other to be able. They have to make like a right coalition to take power. If that makes sense. But as you can see, that's basically the map of just Maidan. So you've got pro-Maidan over on that side, with Kiev in the middle being pro and against. And then you've got the against side on the east. So basically, during the protests that were happening in Kiev, there would be opposition protests who would then get set upon by like nationalists who'd been like bussed in to work security on these protests. Or if that didn't happen, the nationalists would like find some police or a trade union building to go and smash up, because what do fascists do when they're not like bullying regular people? They go and burn down trade union buildings, right? As of what happened in Germany. So during all that, you would end up with towns starting to resist, basically towns in the east starting to resist the Maidan, and then pro-Maidan goons would turn up in that town and cause havoc. And it got to the point where in Odessa there was a house of trade unions in Odessa. There was a protest against Maidan at the trade union building, which fascists turned up to and sort of like chased people inside the building, and then they like barricaded the front and fucking set fire to the doors, and there was like 50 people died in that. People were jumping off the roof, people were getting shot at as they were trying to climb from windows. There were kids in there, all kinds of horrific stuff going on when society collapses, and this is in 2014. So the war has started at this point. Hostilities have begun, right? And then you have the East's response to this is to declare independence, which is the Donetsk Republic and the Lugansk Republic held referendums in 2014 to declare independence, which were like 90% yes. 95% yes. So I think then at that point, obviously Russia's then sort of steps in,
and also don't forget that the Crimea also had its referendum on joining the Russian Federation at the same time. They'd obviously also seen fascist violence. They knew that they were at severe risk, and because obviously Russians had a military base in Crimea anyway, that was the easiest place to secede, right? Because no forces had to come in. The forces were already there, so all they had to do was pass the legislation, and they were already protected. I mean, obviously the West still called it an annexation.
Changed the flags over, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean the West still called it an annexation. Evil Putin annexing Crimea because Putin bad. But like, whereas with Donetsk and Lugansk, these places where they had to form their own independent militias. Sorry, I'll let you get back to that.
You what, Tom?
Huh? Sorry, where did I cut off?
No, you're fine. You just stopped.
Oh no. No, I was just saying, with Crimea, as the West calls it, an illegal annexation, it was obviously not. It was a demonstration of people's dissatisfaction with the coup regime in Kiev. I mean, the fact is that prior to 2014, Yanukovych was in power, and this was the first time that we'd seen GDP per capita of the average Ukrainian start to rise. Because, as I said to Vito last night, Ukraine is an artificial construct of a state, right? It's never been its own independent state separate from Russia. I mean, the Kievan Rus existed, but this was before Russia existed. The only time it was ever independent was when the Stepan Banderites came in and liberated glory to Ukraine and all this bullshit. And then since the fall of the USSR. So Ukraine's entire economy, its entire productive economy, was always based on things that it was easier to produce in Ukraine than it was in the mainland of Russia, because it was always a Russian part of Russia. So their economy relies upon good trade with Russia as an independent state, because they only produce things that Russia needs. And essentially, when Maidan happened, they said, no more trade with Russia, no more commerce with Russia. You know, we're not gonna sell you aircraft engines, we're not gonna sell you coal, we're not gonna sell you boat propellers, these kind of things. And as a result, like, I don't know, the people in Ukraine maybe thought that Germany and France would want to buy these things, but Germany and France have their own domestic industries for these imports, right? So the Ukrainian economy essentially began to collapse effective immediately when they cut off trade with Russia, because it's naturally their largest trade partner based on the things they export, the things they produce. So as a result of this, you've got the people in the east who they're in the industrial towns. Kharkov, you know, one of the largest industrial regions in Ukraine. Donetsk has a lot of heavy industry,
mines, steel plants. It's literally the
and again,
industrial heartland of Ukraine.
No one wants
the USSR.
No one wants Ukrainian steel, because, I mean, Russia did, because it was cheaper than what they could produce domestically. But, I mean, you know, Germany produces steel, the UK produces steel of a higher quality than that of Ukraine, supposedly, and China produces supposedly lower quality steel, but for a much cheaper price. So there's no reason to buy the middle ground product when there's either higher quality products for slightly more money or lower quality products for a lot less money. You're not going to go and buy the middle of the range. So their entire economy essentially began to collapse. We started to see a major regression in Ukrainian GDP per capita. We started to see a lot of privatizations, abject neoliberalism imposed by the government, imposed by the IMF in Ukraine. And as a result of all of these factors, alongside the very real threat of Nazism that was affecting the people in the east of Ukraine, they didn't want any part of this shit. They saw the writing on the wall. They saw what was happening, and they said, you know, we would rather go it independently and try to in some way rejoin Russia, be that through trade ties, through diplomatic alliances, or in the case of Crimea, through allowing ourselves to be annexed. I don't even think that's how annexation works. You can't allow yourself to be annexed. Annexation requires force, I believe, or at least you know, the kind of the political or diplomatic force. Not very rarely do people vote to be annexed.
They're not like setting up a. Russia didn't come in and set up like a provisional government and stuff, did they? They just the states declared on their own. I mean, we've had people asking us like, do these places really administer themselves? Which is a fair enough question, right? Because if you don't know, I can't blame people living in the imperial core for not having the time of day to have researched the ins and outs of the near 10-year conflict, right? So I can look past that in terms of people asking them sort of questions, but I think people have got to be ready for it. And people were asking us earlier, like, have these places have they really administered themselves for 8 years? As if, like, you know, they have just been some sort of mysterious puppet of Russia, right? But it's just simply not true, and it's just so simplistic.
Russophobic. Yeah, I mean, when I say Russophobic, I don't mean people hate Russia, but like the Western mainstream media is so keen to demonize Russia at any stance. I mean, you take a look at how the Western media has reported on Donetsk and Lugansk for the past 8 years, because they do report on them, but they always refer to them as Russian-backed separatists, right?
But again, it's just smart use of language, right? Because technically they're Russian ethnically, right? But they're not Russian. They are pro-Russian because they're Russian people. That's like saying it's like describing I don't know, Black Lives Matter as being pro-African. Do you get what I mean? You're mixing their ethnic background into trying to imply that they're pro. It's a sneaky game, isn't it? By referring to them as pro-Russian, you're implying that they are some sort of Putin puppet, right? And not just pro-Russian because they are Russian, right? And not Russian as in they are nationals of the state, the current state of Russia. They are ethnically Russians, right? Westerners do not have a problem with understanding that concept. So
I got accused of ethno-nationalism the other day when I talked about this to somebody on Twitter. I said something along the lines of, these people are ethnically Russian. They're facing risk of pogroms and ethnic cleansing by the Ukrainian side, and you know the situation is horrible. This is why they seceded. And the response was like, ethno-nationalism? That's a bad look, my dude. And I'm just like, shut the fuck up, man.
Well, what about this, right? Well, what about this? Is this not an example of ethno-nationalism? During Maidan, some groups in Kiev invited Crimeans to come to Kiev to take part in opposition, quote unquote, opposition protests. Now, I don't know if they were legit or not. I'm not going to speculate on that. But anyway, they were invited to Kiev to take part in some opposition protest, and they went, and they basically got chased out of the city by Nazi thugs, pro-Maidan thugs, because they'd driven right into the belly of the beast, right, in its most horrible part. And then all the way back to Crimea, they said they were getting followed, having to stop at roadblocks, getting pelted. Yeah, their coaches getting pelted with stuff from the sides of the roads, etc., etc. Until one point they got to some town on the way back and reached some checkpoint, and you've got witnesses saying that Nazis came out from like the side of the road and threw glue all over the front of the coach, so the driver couldn't see the road, and rounded us all up and forced us to sing the Ukrainian national anthem and called us Russian scum and Crimea. So this is why Crimea voted in 90% to leave Ukraine, because events like this were happening to them. They were getting invited over to apparently take part in this democratic Maidan process, and then getting set upon, right? Is that not ethno-nationalism? How these people were treating ethnic Crimeans for simply being ethnic Crimean, right?
I mean, the fascists in Ukraine, because obviously we're not saying that all of Ukraine is fascist. There seems to be an assertion that like people think is like a gotcha almost when you start talking about the fascism in Ukraine. They're like, well, not everyone in Ukraine is a fascist. Well, of course not. Not everyone in 1937 Germany was a fascist, but there was a significant number of fascists, and enough, obviously not the same level as you had in Nazi Germany, but you've got enough fascists that are state sanctioned, that are not arrested, but
give me a
in
sec,
fact
Tom.
emboldened.
Hold that thought, Tom. Lads in the chat, just stop like attacking each other, right? Keep it friendly. Carry on, Tom.
Right, sorry. So you have a significant number of fascists that are causing significant numbers of problems, and the main issue is that these fascists are basically state sanctioned, right? I hear the counter claim like come in that people say, oh well, Russia has Nazis too. Yeah, sure. Every European country has fascists. This is not
Every country has fascists, right?
Yeah, I mean every country has right wingers. I mean, I think you only really get neo-Nazis in like places like Europe, America, and South
they're
America.
all over. They're just different blends. They're just slightly different, aren't they? They just have a slightly. They just adapt to that landscape. I'm pretty sure like Sammy has no problem in referring to like ISIS as just straight up fascists. They're just a different flavour of, right?
Right. But what I'm getting at is that in Russia, it's essentially if you go out marching with swastikas, death's head, fucking insignias, SS symbology, this is an actual crime, right? It's a crime that you will be sent to prison for, because much like in Germany today, even though obviously we can all talk about the merits of German denazification, how successful it was or wasn't, especially in the West, it's still a crime to be supportive of Nazi, the Nazi ideology, right? Same in Russia, because obviously they were the kind of one of the largest groups that was at the receiving end of Nazi fascism. Now, in Ukraine, the difference in this situation, which is what people just don't seem to either want to understand or refuse to accept, is that not only is the government extremely sympathetic to fascism, to the extent that they will side with fascist parties openly. I mean, like, you look at the Tories in the UK, right? The Tories in the UK would never form an alliance with, I say never, but at this point in time, they would not form an alliance with the likes of the BNP, the British Nazi Party,
well,
you know, things like this.
One with the DUP, who are the Northern Irish version
I know.
of the BNP, right? So it's not out of the realm of possibility.
But you don't see the DUP marching around fucking giving, like, Hitler salutes and, you know, marching on synagogues and shit. What I'm getting at is open neo-Nazis, not just extreme right-wing people, which I think is the differentiation here. And now these open neo-Nazis in Ukraine are not only supported by the government in the parliament, as they form, as you say, coalitions with them, Svoboda, the OUN, these kind of parties. What's Klitschko's party called?
It was called something like, hold on, I'm going to get it up.
For Ukraine or something.
Yeah, something like that. Because the coalition was called like they ended up calling it like the All Ukraine Coalition or something, didn't they?
While you're finding that anyway, I'll essentially, my point is that not only is this kind of level of open support for Nazi fascism like allowed in Ukraine, it's not just allowed, it's actively supported. You see photographs of Stepan Bandera being raised on like town halls in the west of Ukraine. You see
the Democratic Alliance for Reform.
Yeah, of course. So, you know, you see all this like pro-Nazi imagery from so-called what's the wording? Oh my god, I've lost my train of thought now. Sorry. Oh yeah. So you see it from not only from like town halls and stuff, which will raise Stepan Bandera flags and pictures of the man's face. Stepan Bandera being a Nazi collaborator who was responsible for the execution of Jews and Poles in occupied Ukraine during Hitler's time, by the way, for those who aren't absolutely certain. And then obviously you've got their open allowance into the Ukrainian military, like not in an official capacity. They officially represent the Ukrainian military, and it's not the same as, you know, when you've got British soldiers who you see flying a Nazi flag in Afghanistan in one shaky image, and you're like, oh well, you know, is the British army full of Nazis? I'm sure there's a few Nazis in the British army, but they were punished, right? Because they made the British state look bad. The British state doesn't want to be seen supporting Nazism, even though they do bad things themselves, horrifically badly. Yeah. But in Ukraine, a good proportion of their armed forces is extreme neo-Nazis. Not even just like people who are walking around with a Hitler flag for the banter or whatever these fucking idiots were doing in Afghanistan, the Brits and the Americans and the Aussies, but literal, actual, like, genocidal Nazis, right? This is what we're facing up against. So yes, Russia does have neo-Nazis, but it's a crime. Ukraine normalizes and supports its neo-Nazi groups.
Right? There's a difference between having them and having them in power, right? Because, like I say, every country in Europe and in the world can be guilty of having them. It's, I mean, even having them is one too many. I fully back that idea. Just one is 100% too many. But yeah, there is a difference between them being in the woods and being in power, right? A big difference. Anyway,
exactly.
on the screen now, look, this is Donetsk Airport before 2014 at the top. Donetsk had if you're one of our European listeners, right? 2012, Ukraine hosted the Euro Championships, right? They built like brand new stadiums and all sorts. England fans were at Donetsk. That's where the England team was based, in Donetsk. This was an international airport. Civilian airport. It's not a military location, it's a civilian airport. Modern, brand new airport built. Look at the state of it. That's it in 2015 at the bottom, after the Ukrainian militia turned up. It's a civilian airport. They just cut people in the area off from being able to leave, basically, in any other means than going right through Russia. The size of Russia, right? To travel all that way through. But Is that not like, you know, an attack on Ukrainian civilians, destroying one of their airports? People in Donbass are Ukrainian, remember, right? So how are we?
Where?
Well,
Where
yeah. At this point, yes, right. At the point in time that we're looking at the picture I'm talking about, they were. So how have we gone to this? How are we discussing this? I think the point for me is we are discussing a war that's going on, and we are discussing it as if it's Russia versus NATO, even though NATO aren't even on the ground, right? It's Russia versus the West, or the idea of the West, or whatever, however you want to frame it. And it's not like the fact that this has been going on for 8 years and people have been.
I think as you
go on.
I think as you said before, a lot of people don't know anything about this conflict, right? Not a lot of people have been following it for the length of time that we have. And that's not something to be ashamed of. You know, it's, you know, you shouldn't feel bad for not knowing anything about it. But it's the people that don't know anything about it that are now getting all of their views from the mainstream media, from British and American media particularly, right? British and American media has a vested interest in making Russia out to be demonized, demonize Russia, carve it away from Europe, remove any influence it has in Western Europe. And the Ukraine situation is a great way to do it. So that's why, as I said before, when they were talking about the Donbass as Russian-backed separatists and nothing more, it removes all their kind of autonomy. It removes
their Ukrainianness as well, right? Because you've deemed them as now just Russian separatists that are occupying the Donbass, right? Which is it's not that, and it's never been that. I mean, what do you think to this image? This is one of the videos that's. I've not seen the BBC post this opinion. It's on the ground. People might accuse us of not showing any of the other side. You can go and find all that on just type in Ukraine on Google and you will get the other side until you're blue in the face. What do you make of this picture? So here's somebody commenting on the Russian manoeuvres in there. This is from Donbass area. Somebody living there. May God protect you guys. We've been waiting for you for 7 years. Actually, we've been waiting for you since 1991.
Is
what
it
do they mean
from
by that, though?
Recently? Is it from recently? Is it? This
yeah, this is from like today. What do you think they mean by that? I mean, to me, I don't see that as being an anti-Ukrainian comment. I see that as being an anti-Ukraine being part of the West comment, right? I that's how I see it. I think that Ukrainians are Ukrainians themselves, just like whichever one of our listeners said it earlier on in the chat. It's Ukrainians that are the victim, right? Since 2014, since 1991, since the West tore these. I mean, even the way that the West describes them as the Balkans and all this, it's just such a demeaning term to refer to these places. You're referring to them after the splitting up of them that we did, like as if it was like legal. The destruction of East Germany, is enough of an illegal crime, and they just repeated that across all the way up to what's now the Russian border, right?
And they didn't stop at what's now the Russian border either.
No,
they had Chechnya, they had they had all of these kind of attacks on the actual Russian heartland. And that is kind of when Putin came in and said no more of this shit, and he put a stop to the Chechnyan war, and he moved on. The separatists in Georgia trying to the government in Georgia trying to embolden again extreme right wing elements from carving off parts of Russia.
Is there any while you've just mentioned that, is there? Some of our viewers might not remember Georgia, right? Okay, so in 2008, there was, I'm not going to go into the whys and whats, and you can find out for yourself, but there was a separatist, a declaration of independence from the former Soviet state of Georgia, right? South, is it Ossetia?
Ossetia.
And what's the one in the corner? I can't remember the name.
Transnistria.
No, that's the other one. It begins with A.
Oh, anyway. It's Moldova. Abkhazia.
Yeah, so a similar situation to this. Now, when I say similar, is the response of, because the Georgian government assumed basically Russia stepped in to defend these territories from the Georgian army. That there was videos at the time of the Georgian army going into cities in that contested area and just indiscriminately shooting. It's 2008, so it was like the first it was that period in history where suddenly everybody had a camera in their pocket, right? So Georgian troops were filming videos of themselves driving through streets similar to the ones in the video and just shooting at everything that moved, shooting at just buildings, just causing destruction, which caused like an outcry. It caused an outcry in the West, and it's probably the reason why the West didn't step in really to defend the Georgian government, because of the atrocities that the Georgian military were doing. I guess if it had not been filmed, they probably would have stepped in, because they had no problem with stepping in the 90s in Yugoslavia. I don't want to give them a free pass like that, but I think the fact that camera phones kind of stopped it. But anyway, the Georgian government kind of like outplayed themselves, because there's like a famous bit of footage, isn't there, of the Georgian president like eating his own tie because he doesn't know what to say because the situation's got so bad. Because basically exactly the same as what has happened in Ukraine has happened now, which was Russia stepped in to defend the contested zones, the people there who'd declared independence from the state of Georgia, the people who were getting called in the Western media Russian separatists, like pro-Russians or whatever you want to call it. The Russian army went like into Georgia, didn't it? It sort of manoeuvred towards Georgia and got further and further towards the capital until Georgia kind of like submitted and went, right, okay, enough's enough, because they would have just got beaten. So is there a similarity between what Zelensky's response to this is with the Georgian response? Have Ukraine sort of bitten off more than they can chew? That's what I'm getting at, I guess. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been fighting this war, or at least attacking these breakaway republics for the past 8 years. Been shelling them. They thought that Russia was all bark. I genuinely think that was what was happening, because Russia was refusing to do anything insofar as they were pushing the diplomatic option.
They were managing to breach the Minsk Accord whilst Russia just sat there and did nothing, right?
Yeah, they were doing it constantly, and I think that they got a bit too overconfident for themselves, really, thinking that Russia would never do anything, never move on them, because they were too scared of NATO and NATO encirclement, stuff like this. And then eventually there was a straw that broke the camel's back, which was the Normandy 4 meetings 1 week ago, where Russia and its diplomats sat down with Ukrainian diplomats for over 8 hours trying to come to a solution, begging them to abide by the Minsk Accords, and they literally refused to do it. They after 8 hours of negotiations, they came back and said, we have not been able to reach any kind of conclusion with the Ukrainian side. And I think this is when the Russian side gave up on diplomacy, genuinely. Within 4 days of that meeting, they recognized the sovereignty of the Donbass republics. And then within 1 day of the declaration of recognition of sovereignty, they formed a military pact with the Donbass republics. And basically, I don't like to use the term because it's a Nazi term, but it can only be described as a lightning war, what we've seen. They went in with very specific objectives. They went in hard and very fast, and they were able to kind of bring Ukraine back to the table in a way that has not been tried yet.
Like, we're seeing, now, since we've started the show, apparently they're asking for ceasefires and we're willing to negotiate peace. So hopefully we will see an end to this. There's reports out there in the face of corporate media declaring that like it's the end of the world. Right? We are seeing reports of like in Chernobyl. Okay. Apparently, both sides, both Russia and Ukraine, are both sat at the base as comrades, right? Not fighting. They're running a place together, apparently, because this situation is so manufactured. People just don't want to fight. I don't think Europeans want to fight on behalf of the IMF, right? I think that's what it's coming down to. I think that's why the US is going to struggle to get involved. What I was going to say as well is, in regards to Minsk Protocol, the DPR and the LPR, they declared independence, as far as I know, in 2014, and then sort of walked back on that in order to try and work through Minsk Protocol, right, which would have given them political autonomy inside the Ukrainian state, which is what they wanted. They didn't want to secede from Ukraine. They wanted to just have political autonomy. That didn't mean that like they were getting their resource. It's a resource, a lot of resources in the area, right? They didn't want Kiev to just loot their resources and send it all off to the US, right? So they declared independence and then came back. I think that they've been fair enough. I think that whether you agree, I mean, I personally, right, I have no problem with saying that Russia's capitalist, right, and United Russia is not the be all and end all for Russians, right, and socialism will be back in Russia. It's inevitable, right? I think it goes without saying. I don't think that anybody should have a problem with saying that, but to suggest that the best outcome for this is for the US to swing its dick about, right, is completely irrelevant when they are to blame for all this in the first place. The best solution, in my opinion, is we politically reverse Euromaidan, right? A new constitution for Ukraine has to be written, one that abides to Minsk Protocol. If that was to happen, you would probably see LDR and DPR rejoin the state of Ukraine, right? You would probably see that happen.
I mean, the only reason that, as you say, that they even seceded was because they were pushed to do so. They had no other option. They didn't want to secede, essentially. They wanted the political autonomy. They wanted their voices to be respected. They wanted their national language to be respected. And they didn't want Nazis in their territory.
And now, it's not me and you or anybody else in the world that's requested the help of Russia, right? It's them. If you've got a problem with that, then I guess you're gonna have to take it up with these people, not anybody else. It's not my. I have no. It's not my battle, right? But I'm not gonna spit in the face of the DPR and LPR, right?
I see it as very analogous to the situation in Syria. I mean, not exactly the same, obviously, but very, very analogous in the fact that the Syrian state was fighting against American-backed Nazis, ISIS, and their affiliate groups in the region. They were getting overwhelmed. The Nazis got all the way to
hold on. What I'm trying to say, though, right, is even all these stories and comparisons are irrelevant to the point that if these people that we've been watching in the background choose this destiny for themselves, right, then who are you to then stop it from happening, right?
Yeah, no, completely.
You've done nothing else. You've done nothing to help them in the 8 years previously. So why is it now your time to step in and help? I just don't see. I can't see how people support self-determination for Palestine, etc. And pick and choose for other sets of people. How can you support self-determination in Bolivia or Venezuela against like US aggression, but not support these people's fight against because it's not that the Ukraine is to blame, right? It's what the US has done with the concept of the state of Ukraine. It's what the US imperialist class has done with they've used the tool, haven't they? The state as a tool, and it's gone against the Ukrainian people. That's the main thing. there's a state, as any capitalist state does, right? Acts against its own people. That's what's happening there. It's just the fact that it's a lot more obvious that there is a greater power. I mean, the Ukraine president post-Maidan was, this is open fact, isn't it? Find this in mainstream media. Was decided by the US embassy in Kiev. They just told this guy, you're gonna, like, what's that? As soon as that happened, you lost all ground to stand on in terms of, well, we have the thoughts of the people of Ukraine in our mind, right? Imagine if would Westerners accept that for their own country? Would you accept another country in the world meeting with a group of people at their embassy in your country and deciding who's the prime minister? You just won't, would you? It goes without saying. So it's just the double standard, I guess, that gets me. I don't really know what much more we can say on it tonight. I guess you've got to just don't let it, like, don't get too into it, right? Don't start laughing at, don't pick a side in terms of, like, you know, I'm gonna what's the word, have a bloodlust for combat. It's not about that, right? It's about resolving this conflict that's gone on for 8 years. We've got to hope that in a week's time we're sat here and all this is over, right? We've got to.
Can I just point out as well that 2 weeks ago, when we last had the podcast, I said that I thought this would happen, and I also predicted the fall of Afghanistan faster than it did happen. So I think I've got kind of geopolitical third eye.
Stop sucking yourself off. Right, anyway. Yeah, I think we've got hope, and I hope in what's happened so far, it's looking like that. The last thing that we want on Earth now is this to go on. You know, I was going to say another Syria, but it's already a Syria. It's been going on for 8 years. We need to finish this war. We need to finish the Syrian war. We need to finish every other conflict that's going on. We've got bigger things to worry about as a planet, haven't we, than these petty disputes over over ideological, you know, manufactured ideological disputes that other people have made up in order to, you know, delay the progress of humanity. I
hope I'm I hope I'm right, but my assumption is that this culmination of violence that we're seeing right now is a direct result of Putin's wishes and demands not being heard for the past 8 years. Putin has very, very reasonable demands. It's the red line on NATO membership. It's no American weaponry stationed in the territory of Ukraine, and it's for Ukraine to abide by the Minsk Accords, right? This has been Putin's line for the past 10 years, if not longer. These specific red lines.
Russia's line, right? Putin's. It's
Russia's
line.
Sorry, yeah. Russia's line. Now, since the war or the escalation of the war, whatever you want to call it, the invasion, the peacekeeping operation, whatever word you choose to use, Russia could have absolutely annexed Ukraine now if they wanted to. The entire state of Ukraine, they could have done it. Physically, they have the capacity. They destroyed the armed forces. Their troops are moving on Kiev. Like, it's possible to do this, right? Now, I don't think that they want to do this because otherwise they would have already done it. I think that their kind of objective is just to get their red lines heard. Now, Ukraine didn't listen to them for 8 years, and Russia realized that the only language they will understand is violence. So they used the language that Ukraine was using against their people to bring Ukraine back to the table. Now, I don't know how this is going to end up. I don't know whether it's now going to end up in a bit of a regime change operation insofar as ending the reign of the coup government and forcing free and fair elections in Kiev that respect the will of all the people and refuse to allow any kind of American puppet to stand. in which case that would be good, or whether they're just going to force Zelensky to the table and have Zelensky change the constitution himself.
Which is what happened during Maidan, right? Because you remember the footage of them, of like
signing the constitution.
Klitschko like standing over, what's his name? I forgot his name. It's so long ago. The Ukrainian president at the time. Too many names to remember, right? No good here. They forgot his name. He's standing over it, making him sign like a document that says, they basically gave in to all their demands, right? Without any sort of push. Just signed a piece of paper and went, the state is now the US is to do what it wants with. And then he ran off to Kharkiv because he'd seen what was going on outside for the past month. How is that legitimate? But we're at a point now that's not. I mean, how is it any less legitimate? That's where I'm at. I don't. I think people got to see the woods for the trees, right? And not.
I think that you give it by the end of this week. I think we'll see the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, and we'll see some kind of peace treaty brought about. Now, I think that as long as Russia gets its red lines met, and Ukraine implements all the Minsk agreements, I think that we'll see peace in the region. But you've got to remember there are still a lot of neo-Nazis and Banderites in the region. So I don't know what level of sabotage they're going to try and attempt on anyone that capitulates to Russian demands. So you know, it could still go bad. It's not going to be a silver bullet to the situation.
Well, that's another problem with the way that the sort of the world is playing itself out these days, right? Something happens and then it's what's the saying? Today's news is tomorrow's chip paper. Now, I guess if British listeners will understand that, that's how these events happen these days, don't they? So everybody is kind of expecting that. These conflicts are hot on the press for 2 weeks, and then slowly they fall out of the news cycle, don't they? And then they become like the Afghanistan war, which is 20 years long and would like take up news space once every 6 months that says something like, is the Afghan war still worth fighting? And it would be the sort of like liberal article that poses that question and even is self-aware to the point where it knows that it's been an utmost failure but can't admit that openly. So at the end the answer is yes, we still should be there, right? So then 3 years later the same article comes out. We don't want that type of situation to happen. I'm hoping that in 2 weeks time we're talking about something completely different, and this is a long forgotten period of history. That's what I'm hoping is happening. Like you say, you never know, do you?
Thing is, if Russia gets its demands met,
they might get them in the next day, right? Because like I said a minute ago, as we started, they're asking for ceasefires and negotiations and stuff. It's just how can you trust how can you trust them to hold a ceasefire when they're the ones been breaching it for so long, right?
That's what I'm thinking. I think that if there is a peace agreement and Russia gets its demands met, I think we'll see a couple of days worth of Western media shrieking about how, you know, Russia used violence to bring another country to the table, all this bullshit. But then in retrospect, I think that like they'll just forget about it immediately because they don't want to talk about how the war's now come to an end, and you know, they don't want to talk about Russia's concerns either. They don't want people to know what Russia's concerns are, right? Because if the Western media starts outlining that the Donbass now has autonomy, people in the West are going to be like, what the fuck is the Donbass? Because they've just had Russian-backed separatists for the past 7 years. You know, if Russia plays this really well and kind of gets their demands met while simultaneously, you know, getting the demands of the DPR and the LPR met, then we're going to see silence from the Western media because they can't they can't. If they don't get the big, bloody, violent, evil Russian war that they've been hyped for so long, they look like fools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's, NATO, their original response, which was like, "We're going to sanction you," it kind of shows how they don't really know what to do, because they can't just do what they did to Iraq, which was, again, if you're old enough to remember the invasion of Iraq, which was beamed into like all our homes, they literally like put on like a live feed of Baghdad getting
smashed with like depleted uranium and stuff.
Yeah, and almost like, you know, laughing about it whilst it's going on. So, but they can't do that now, can they? Because these other countries have got to the point where they have enough like sovereign power to be able to defend against that. So the only response was to sanction them, and now they know that sanctions are already impossible. Like Britain is sanctioning Vladimir Putin himself, and then Putin's like, "But I've got no business in the UK. So like, what are you even doing?"
And essentially these sanctions on Russia from the UK, like they're all that is really blunting the Western diplomatic ability to converse with Russia.
UK, exactly, but UK sanctions are pointless anyway, because they're not the fucking US. Only US sanctions are really.
The UK is pointless, but again, could have just stopped at that.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, Russia has, because of how it's been treated. How do you expect? I don't understand how the West expects. You can't just create enemies out of thin air and then expect these countries that you have decided is your enemy to just lay down and be like, okay, we'll be your enemy, and at the same time lay down and just like let you bully us. It just doesn't. It doesn't work. It just doesn't exist, does it? That's never existed. So this is why you've got them posting video footage of video games, right? Because they just don't have that footage of the enemy being evil. I guess you just got to leave. It's there. How to put this? You've got to leave. If we'd have left them alone in the first place, right, we wouldn't be in this situation. Do you get what I mean? We've like made our own bed, so now it's time to lie in it. I say our, I mean, you know, the West. So I guess that's why the response is like this time, because normally they would have just airstrikes and bombed it. They're used to picking on weaker oppositions and getting suckering these weaker opposition into like a long drawn out occupation, you know. And I think that the fact that, I mean, there's definitely something to be said, isn't there, for the way it's all happened, and I think it's surprised everybody, right? Strategically, whether you agree or not is another question, but it's definitely been a lot more than what people expected and taken a lot of people by surprise, isn't it? So we've just got to make sure and hope that, you know, like I say, by next week we're sat talking about some stupid article they've written about China, right? We want to get back to talking about why, you know, why it's funny that people don't like a ski slope at the Olympics rather than this. Do you get what I mean? Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think we'll end there for today. I think we're just going round now. I don't really know. I don't really think we ourselves have got anything more to add than just be like, look at both sides. There's nothing wrong with reading the Western media stuff. You've got to look at it to realise they're lying, right? How do you know they're lying or bending the truth? I don't even want to say lying, because they're usually just being economical with the truth. Yeah, exactly. Economical with the truth, right? Like with the pro-Russian. Well, of course they're pro-Russian because they are Russian. They're just not Russian Russians. They're Ukrainian Russians. So when you wade through the truth, it all makes sense, doesn't it? And you've got to keep doing that. And as a communist, of course, anti-war is the default position. I'm pretty sure the people of Donbass are anti-war after 8 years of being shelled in civilian areas. If you were to ask them, if you know anybody there, try and ask them. Their opinion is what matters the most in this, because they're the victims of this. Yeah, I guess that's it. You got anything you want to add, Tom? Vito's very quiet. I think he fell asleep.
There was, obviously a lot of people on the liberal side were trying to get China to denounce Russia. We haven't mentioned China once this episode, but I've just seen a fantastic tweet here from one of my Chinese friends. NATO owes China a blood debt was trending at number 9 when I last checked Douyin. Most Westerners have zero clue what this means, but Chinese people do.
Is it about Serbia?
Yeah, the bombing of the Chinese embassy during the Yugoslav wars. The America never apologized for killing Chinese journalists.
I have a theory. I have a theory in regards to that, which I'm going to put to you now. I'm not 100% backing this theory myself. It's just something to consider. But I do believe that the rise of the Greens in Taiwan is down to that, because there were mass protests in Taiwan. When they did that, it pretty much turned KMT against the US, and they had to then, back to square one. But anyway, carry on.
That's it, really. If you're wondering why China's staying silent on these issues, it's because China wants absolutely fuck all to do with NATO. Ukraine has fucked China over multiple times in the past economically, and China and Russia have a very strong alliance. So China is taking the path of non-interference, they usually do, but while simultaneously backing Russia. So if this does, because when we look at the causes of World War One, the causes of World War Two, obviously you can always see the build-up, but there's always one one event that breaks the camel's back, one straw that breaks the camel's back, kind of thing.
As if
like
all World War One is to do with the shooting of Franz Ferdinand and not like the events. No, it's the shooting of Franz Ferdinand is like the green light, but
yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at. Is essentially this could go very badly. No one's saying it's. If NATO decides to involve, it could very much be the end of the world. And based on the fucking idiots we've got in charge in the UK and the USA, and the incompetent leadership in Germany, I think Macron is one of the only
countries that have used nukes before. I mean, used nukes in Serbia as well.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is this could all still go very badly. We're not out of the woods yet. Especially if the West doesn't get the ideal evil Russian escalation that they're looking for.
Exactly. Let's hope it stays at sanctions.
Yeah, and I mean, what I'm getting at here is China and Russia are very coordinated at the moment geopolitically, and if the West decides to launch a war on Russia, I think that will become a world war instantly. It will become a third world war, and it will become an incredibly short one, and an incredibly devastating one. And none of us want that to happen. So
and also, right, if you completely don't want to support Russia, right? Russia recognizing the DPR on the LPR, then feel free to not support Russia's recognition and support Cuba's recognition instead, if you want, unless you've got a problem with Cuba. If you've got a problem with Cuba and you're calling yourself like a socialist, though, it's a little bit strange if you ask me. Venezuela have also recognized them, and I believe Syria as well, and I think a few others. Maybe you'd have to look into that yourself, but still, like I say, if you don't want to support Russia's recognition of the DPR, right? The DPR and LPR, support Cuba's recognition instead, right?
You
go. Anyway, Artsy,
what was that?
We've
you
come
cut
to
out there.
I was just like beckoning you to explain the painting because it's the end of the show. Also, the chat's asking, how are you today? before we end?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Still kind of recovering and everything, but I'm glad I'm able to paint at least.
Nice.
And in terms of the painting, I just I think I'll probably call it rebirth. Really, we really need a new sort of rebirth on the left here in terms of understanding nuance on these issues, and finding revolutionary energy for organizing, because everybody's exhausted, and that's what I hope to see. And then also, of course, yes, like you said at the beginning, it beckons back to imagery from the Soviet Union. So
Nice.
I'll probably try to finish it tonight, because I put down linseed oil, so I have to get this done while it's still wet.
You're on the clock.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll probably take a break and come back.
Are you going to be
but yeah,
streaming? Are you going to stream it, or are you going to finish
Probably.
it off? All right, okay.
Probably.
If you stream it, just send me in a message and I'll post it out so anybody can watch you finish it. I myself am not really, apart from that painting of Kim you did, I'm not really used to seeing you paint like living things, usually just landscapes.
Yeah.
So it's quite amazing.
Well, cool. Yeah, and you can find me at artsy_Marxist on Twitter and all the other platforms. Yeah, I used to do a lot of animals and then began doing landscapes more, but it's kind of fun going back to something like that, So, plus the Phoenix is so fun. All the different colors that you can use.
Nice.
So-
And also, I'm very jealous at just you hearing you say just so casually, well, I can do landscapes, I can do animal. All right, you know what I mean? Show off.
Well, it's nothing for lack of hard work, so.
Yeah, exactly. Practice makes perfect, right? Anyway,
Right.
thanks for being with us. You'll be with us again, I'm sure, next time, right?
Yep,
Of course, right.
I'll be here.
If you want to follow Artsy, I think, did we tag you in the tweet? I put it out really late. If not, I'll put out another tweet and you can follow Artsy and check out all the paintings. We've got an article on the website with some of your older work on it. We could probably do with updating that. So let's try and do that at some point. But yeah, awesome. Thanks for being with us. Vito, are you awake or did you fall asleep? You've been muted like since the start of the show. Vito, are you here?
I'm good. Yeah.
As long as you're good, that's all that matters. Right, next week.
Basically, I did. Yeah.
Next week, have like a sleep before the show starts, and then you'll be in prime condition, right? For more Vitoism, make sure you tune in next week. Tom, as always, thanks for getting up at 6 a.m. as well to join us.
My pleasure.
And everybody in the chat, it's been quite an active one tonight, I guess for obvious reasons. You can follow us on Twitter if you don't already. We've got a Patreon, we've got all that stuff. Go check it out. I'm not going to do too much self-plugging because I can't be bothered and I hate doing it. Right, guys in the Discord, just keep quiet and let this music play out for a bit.